Okay, so, a long time ago, like 1,000 years ago, way over on the other side of the world, there was this huge empire that spread over the entire known world. The cities were gigantic, sprawling clusters of marble and stone and clay, and the rich guys all lived up in the inner city, surrounded by walls. The peasants and workers lived in glorified huts below. Of course, this kind of super powerful country has a super powerful man-god king in charge of everything. This guy, Malachus, sat high on his throne in the capital of his empire, and looked down on every poor sap that came in to talk to him. Where the rest of the clergy and royals lived in what were basically just glorified boxes, Malachus lived in the zenith, a huge palace with a unique design and made from only the most precious materials. The people, of course, had been eager to build this massive spires and arches and stuff, because he was their hero. He had saved them from the evil warrior king who was in power before. The old king ignored the poor, using them as tools to bring in riches, and the peasants never complained because they never knew there was any other way of going about life. Malachus, on the other hand, saw the royals for what they were, greedy scumbags. He and his bro, Brutus, rose to fight the old king. This was not an easy feat. The warrior king had trolls, he had dragons. The guy himself was decked out in 1,000 pounds of ancient magical relics that made him practically invincible. But Malachus started small. He gathered a few followers in his hometown. He rallied his neighbors and friends to help him push his way into the seat of power once held by the lord of the area. Then, once he'd started to make a name for himself, he attacked a neighboring land. One by one, the warrior king lost huge chunks of his empire to Malachus and Brutus, and some of the country's oldest enemies started to fight right there alongside Malachus. The brothers were accumulating relics of their own, gaining power. The day finally came where Malachus and his armies of men and trolls and clockworks and griffin riders and giant spiders and all sorts of other monsters and machines strolled right up to the gates of the capital and moved on the city. Walls crumbled, houses of the rich were toppled, the streets, once white with marble, were stained red, permanently. So then Malachus, all suited up with his own magical gear and stuff, smashed his way into the old palace to duke it out with the old king. The old king just grinned at him, and Malachus got all pissed off and charged right at the guy, all like, "I will murder your face!" By the time Brutus arrived, Malachus had crushed the old king, and was wearing the crimson crown and robes he'd taken from the body of his enemy. Now Malachus is the warrior king, and for a while he kept his promises. The gold collected by the clergy was used to repair canals and build new machines and structures for the protection and service of his people. He felt like his followers would appreciate the services he provided for them. He thought that the things he produced would make his people happy. Unfortunately, he realized that people would always want more. The guys who were once grateful for his service and for the freedom he brought started to ask for more and more. They wanted bridges across the rough rivers. They wanted tunnels through the mountains. They wanted the giants to be posted farther away so there was more room for the farmland. Malachus, of course, could not grant every request, and he could not hear every plea. He was one king, and his laborers only had so much power and so much time in a day. Eventually, the new warrior king stopped seeing lower-class people, and instead told all his plans to the equivalent of the press. He ignored his followers and just did what he wanted to do, hoping they'd like it. He knew his followers didn't like him for him, they liked what he did for them. He retreated from the press one day. He hid in his chambers and brooded. All the power he held, it felt like he was wasting it. Why make things for the people who don't really know or like you? Why not make them for yourself? So he made war. With his power and with his people, he made war against the Easterners, and against the ocean nations, and against the people of the sky, and against the goblins that crawled beneath the earth. He plundered, he pillaged, he gained more power and land. He didn't do what he did for his followers, he did it for himself. His brother knew this. Brutus, the second in command during the revolution, had vanished for decades. And when he came back to see his bro up in the seat of power, barking orders and getting his people killed for a false sense of glory, he was shocked and confused. He began to talk to the people, and, just as before, with the old king, the poor folk of the land were starving. Their homes crumbled and their farms were damaged by the footsteps of giants. Brutus, taking a page from his brother's book, started a rebellion. Before Malachus could know what was going on, The walls of the zenith crumbled, and his own brother stood over him. "You said you'd never be like this," Brutus grumbled to his younger brother, who looked more like the old king now than he ever did. "You swore you'd never end up like him." Brutus was not the one that killed his younger brother. He could never have brought himself to do that. Malachus killed himself. He realized he was no different from the monstrous man he'd overthrown, so he flung himself from the central spire of the zenith and into the rabble below. Brutus, looking from the ledge after his brother, saw only the swarm of 10 million people that once loved and respected Malachus, and he cried.